It's July 2026, and a lot of Windows 11 machines are quietly doing more work than their owners ever agreed to. You can feel it when the fan spins up during something that should be boring. You can see it when Task Manager insists your CPU is fine, but the system still feels sticky, like it's dragging an anchor behind it. And the most frustrating part is that it doesn't look like malware. It looks like Windows. It looks official. It looks like the future you were told you needed. But what if the real story here isn't actually about AI features at all? What if it's about control? Who gets to spend your compute budget? Who decides what helpful actually means? And who pays the electricity bill when your operating system decides it's time to quietly analyze your life in the background? Here's the part. That should make you sit up straight. Microsoft has built a new class of Windows 11 machines, Copilot Plus PCs, specifically designed around running AI workloads locally, using a dedicated neural processing unit capable of more than 40 trillion operations per second. That's not a marketing metaphor. That's an explicit hardware target. A new baseline Windows is being steered toward across its entire product line. And when a platform gets designed around an always available AI accelerator, sitting idle in the background, the next logical step is simple. Make more of the operating system depend on it, make more of the OS feed it, and make more of the OS normalize the idea that background analysis is just the cost of doing business now. You've probably heard the reassurance already. It's local, it's encrypted, it's opt-in. And yes, some of that is genuinely true in the narrowest legal sense. But your CPU cycles don't care about legal phrasing. Your battery doesn't care about marketing language. Your machine cares about physics. Something is taking snapshots. Something is indexing. Something is encrypting. Something is maintaining databases. Something is running background services. And it's doing it often enough to be genuinely useful. That something is computation you already paid for, time you reasonably expected to belong to your apps. Your work, your games, your renders, your compiles, your actual life. Let's talk about recall, because it remains the clearest window into what Windows 11 has become since its rocky debut 2 years ago. Microsoft's own documentation describes recall as taking periodic snapshots whenever the content on your screen changes, organizing them into a searchable timeline, storing them locally and analyzing them locally so you can search using plain, natural language. That analysis is what makes recall genuinely useful, but analysis is never free. It's CPU scheduling, NPU dispatch, memory pressure, disk writes, encryption overhead, and a constant background posture of observe and interpret running continuously in the background. Even when the heavy math gets offloaded to the NPU itself, the rest of the operating system still has to orchestrate everything happening around it. And if you're thinking this is just a niche feature you'll personally never touch, notice something important about how it's actually built. Recall isn't presented like a normal app you install and can simply delete. It's positioned as a core Windows capability. Microsoft's own support documentation explains how to remove it by navigating to turn Windows features, on or off, unchecking recall, and restarting your PC, explicitly noting that previously saved snapshots get deleted when you remove the feature this way. That's not the language of a casual optional toy sitting in an app store, somewhere. That's the language of an operating system component that expects to exist by default, and expects you to actively manage your relationship with it going forward. Now zoom out, because recall is genuinely only one piece of a much larger pattern. Microsoft's Copilot story has already shifted meaningfully even in just the past year. What most people still picture as Copilot in Windows isn't even the same thing it was 18 months ago. Microsoft has documented that updated Copilot experiences roll out through routine. Windows updates arriving first as optional non-security preview releases before landing in monthly security updates for both Windows 11 and Windows 10. That detail matters enormously because it normalizes a new reality. AI features aren't simply apps you choose to install anymore. They're update payloads, arriving with Patch Tuesday energy, quiet, automatic, and framed as progress whether you asked for them or not. So when people say, just don't use it, that's genuinely not a complete answer anymore. Not because Microsoft is doing anything supernatural behind the scenes, but because the operating system itself has effectively become a moving river. You don't install Windows once and then live comfortably on that island for 5 years anymore. You're on Windows as a continuously updated service, and the shoreline keeps moving underneath you whether you're paying attention or not. Think of your PC like a factory floor. Your apps are the workers. Your CPU is the main power line. Your RAM is the workspace. Your disk is the warehouse. In the old model, the operating system was simply the building manager. Lights on, doors locked, utilities running quietly in the background. In the model Windows 11 has been building toward, the building manager also hired a team of analysts who walk the factory floor taking notes, copying labels, photographing shipments, and quietly building a searchable history of everything that ever moved through the facility, whether you asked for that history or not. And that's exactly where this story gets genuinely uncomfortable, because the compute cost of those analysts is a lot more measurable than most people realize. That's exactly where we're headed next. Here's the curiosity twist most people miss entirely. Recall is described as locally stored and locally analyzed, and Microsoft repeatedly emphasizes that no cloud connection is required to save or analyze the snapshots. But the moment you build a searchable history of your own screen sitting on disk, you've created a genuinely new, high-value target on your machine. You're not just protecting a handful of documents anymore. You're protecting a compressed summary of your entire behavior, a timeline of what you looked at, what you typed, what you opened, what you searched for, what messages briefly appeared on your screen, what invoices flashed by, what sensitive data momentarily showed in a window you thought nobody was watching. And security was never just about where data physically lives, it's about what the data actually is. That's precisely why regulators started paying close attention. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office has publicly stated its expectation that organizations remain transparent, process personal data only to the extent genuinely necessary for a specific purpose, and assess and mitigate risks before bringing products to market. The ICO explicitly confirmed it was making direct inquiries with Microsoft to understand exactly what safeguards were in place to protect user privacy around recall. When a national privacy regulator starts asking pointed questions like that, it tells you this was never just nerd drama playing out in comment sections. This is governance-level concern about what it genuinely means for an operating system to continuously capture and analyze user activity as a built-in feature. This is really about the re-architecting of the operating system itself, from a passive tool into something closer to an active agent. Historically, an OS waited patiently for your command. It was the stage your software performed on. In the era of Copilot plus PCs and the 40 plus TOPS NPU requirement, the stage has quietly started watching the play. This ambient computing model demands a constant baseline of power draw, which is exactly why users keep noticing sticky performance even when they aren't running anything heavy at all. When Microsoft defines a specific hardware target like 40 TOPS for an NPU, they're not just handing manufacturers a spec sheet, they're setting a computational floor. They're telling developers explicitly, you can now assume there's a massive, always-on AI brain sitting idle in the background of every qualifying machine. That creates a genuine use it or lose it incentive baked directly into the platform. Features like recall are simply the first residents of this new architectural wing, not the last. Recall functions by taking snapshots of your screen every few seconds, a process involving far more than the simple click of a screenshot. It involves semantic analysis of everything visible on that screen. Even when the heavy mathematical lifting gets offloaded to the NPU, the orchestration, moving data from RAM to the NPU, encrypting the resulting database, managing storage of those snapshots over time remains a genuine, measurable tax on the rest of the system. This produces a fragmented performance profile that's genuinely confusing to diagnose. Your CPU might show comfortably low usage in Task Manager, but your system responsiveness still feels heavy, because the internal data bus is busy moving metadata for the AI's own internal memory structures, work that simply doesn't show up in the metrics most people know to check. There's also a hypocrisy worth naming clearly here, because it's not about hunting for a gotcha quote. It's about a repeated pattern of messaging that emphasizes user benefit while the underlying mechanics quietly concentrate more control. Upstream, Microsoft is simultaneously marketing local AI as inherently privacy-friendly, while maintaining a much broader data collection ecosystem that, by its own published documentation, extends well beyond simple crash dumps. Microsoft explicitly defines what it calls connected experiences, Windows features that connect to the internet, and states plainly that when one gets used, data is sent to and processed by Microsoft to actually deliver that experience, something the documentation labels required service data, described as crucial for delivering cloud-based experiences and keeping underlying services secure and up to date. In plain English, the operating system is designed to phone home for large categories of everyday functionality, and Microsoft isn't shy about that fact in its own documentation. Now layer diagnostic data on top of that. Microsoft documents two tiers, required diagnostic data and optional diagnostic data, and explicitly states that the optional tier can include far more detailed information about your device and settings and can include data about the websites you browse and your device activity more broadly. Those aren't conspiracy words pulled from a forum thread. Those are Microsoft's own descriptions of what the optional tier may contain, And once you accept that an operating system can collect browsing and activity signals under the banner of diagnostics, it becomes psychologically and politically much easier to accept that the same operating system can also collect screen snapshots under the banner of helpful AI. Different buckets, but the same underlying direction. More observation, more analysis, more permanent infrastructure built to support both. There's a specific detail buried in Microsoft's optional diagnostic data documentation that lands like a cold splash of water once you actually read it closely. It explicitly lists browsing history data as a defined category, including Microsoft browser data such as text typed directly into the address bar and search box, search terms themselves, and page titles visited. It separately lists inking, typing, and speech utterance. Data as its own category. None of this means your operating system is definitely reading every private thing you type right now. It means the pipeline for that already exists. The categories are already defined. And the definitions are sitting in plain, ordinary product documentation rather than buried in some leaked internal memo. And once a pipeline like that exists inside the operating system, the honest question stops being, could this happen? And becomes something more uncomfortable. What's currently turned on? What's actually required? What quietly changed this month? And how would you even know without checking yourself? That question is exactly where we need to go next, because it's the one that turns this from an abstract architecture conversation into something you can actually verify on your own machine today. So let's get brutally practical with one relatable scenario, because this is where the CPU cycles argument stops being abstract and starts being something you can actually picture happening on your own desk right now. Imagine you're a developer. You've got a browser tab open with documentation, a terminal and IDE, a Slack message, a password manager prompt, a quick invoice PDF, and a private client email, all visible at some point across your session. Your workflow is messy, and that's completely normal for anyone doing real work. If recall is enabled and actively saving snapshots, the system takes periodic screenshots whenever content changes, then stores and analyzes them to make everything searchable later. That means your normal, everyday chaos becomes structured, indexed data. And turning chaos into structure is precisely the kind of job that costs real compute, especially cumulatively, across hours, days, and weeks of continuous operation. Microsoft describes those snapshots as getting organized into a searchable timeline, with natural language search covering both images and text. That implies OCR-style extraction, semantic indexing, ongoing vector database updates, and continuous maintenance work, happening in the background. Even when the NPU handles the AI acceleration itself, the rest of the operating system still has to schedule that work, manage storage limits, enforce retention policies, and keep the whole system feeling responsive while it's doing all of that. It's the same basic principle as GPU-accelerated software, still leaning heavily on the CPU for everything happening around the acceleration itself. So when your machine feels like it's quietly losing responsiveness for no obvious reason, you're not imagining that. You're feeling the real overhead of an operating system increasingly built to behave like a background analyst running continuously alongside whatever you're actually trying to do. Now let's be genuinely fair here, because if you're still listening, you're probably wondering whether any of this actually matters, given that recall is opt-in. Microsoft's current security posture for recall does emphasize that the user stays firmly in control, that it's off by default, and only activates if a user proactively turns it on themselves. Microsoft also describes the snapshots and their associated data as always encrypted, with the encryption keys protected via TPM and tied directly to your Windows Hello identity, usable only inside a secure, isolated environment called a VBS enclave. That's real, meaningful engineering effort. It genuinely isn't nothing, and dismissing it outright would be its own kind of dishonesty. But here's the catch that those protections simply don't address. None of that changes the fundamental truth that once enabled, the system is doing continuous, ongoing work to produce and maintain a searchable memory of your screen. Encryption protects data at rest. It does absolutely nothing to protect your CPU budget while that data is actively being generated and indexed in the first place. That CPU budget is the part nobody puts on a marketing slide, because the moment you start advertising 40 plus TOPS NPUs as a headline spec, you're implicitly telling the entire industry that the PC has become an AI appliance first and a general purpose computer second. Microsoft's own developer guidance states plainly that many new Windows AI features require an NPU capable of running at 40 plus TOPS. That's a genuine line in the sand, so even if recall itself remains opt-in today, the surrounding ecosystem is being built on the assumption that AI workloads running in the background will simply be normal, everyday activity tomorrow, whether or not any single user ever consciously opted into anything specific. Microsoft even includes a screenshot of an NPU performance view directly inside Task Manager in its own developer documentation. That's the quiet normalization happening in plain sight. The operating system expects NPU usage to become something users see regularly and therefore simply accept as background noise. A decade ago, ordinary people watched CPU and RAM usage. Then GPU usage became something people casually checked. Now it's NPU usage joining that same list. The interface itself quietly tells you what the platform wants you to start treating as completely normal, and the more familiar it becomes to see an AI compute graph moving in the background of your own machine, the easier it becomes for the operating system to justify spending your hardware budget on assistive features you personally never asked for in the first place. To be genuinely fair to Microsoft here, and it's worth being fair, the company has walked back some of its more aggressive AI integration over the past several months, following sustained user backlash. Reporting from earlier, this year confirmed Microsoft scaled back plans to weave Copilot directly into areas like system notifications and settings, and shelved several previously announced integration points after the visible clutter drew genuine widespread criticism across the user base. That retreat is real, and it matters. But here's the distinction worth holding on to carefully. Pulling back on visible AI clutter, buttons, branding, forced prompts is a completely different decision from pulling back on the underlying architecture, doing continuous background computation. So far, Microsoft has clearly only made the first of those two decisions. The NPU requirement stayed. The required telemetry baseline stayed. Recall's core architecture stayed, defended publicly by Microsoft's own research leadership, even amid ongoing documented security concerns throughout this year. Retreating from a floating button in Notepad costs Microsoft almost nothing. Retreating from the compute infrastructure itself would mean walking back the entire strategic bet the company has made on AI-first computing, and nothing in the actual roadmap suggests that's happening anytime soon. So given all of that, what can you actually do about it today? On your own specific machine, using nothing but tools and settings that already exist inside Windows itself right now? That's exactly where we're headed next, and it's the part of this video I genuinely encourage you to actually follow along with, rather than just watch passively, because every step here is something you can verify for yourself within the next few minutes. Let's talk hypocrisy for a moment, because it's not about hunting for a gotcha quote from a Microsoft executive. It's about a repeated pattern of messaging that focuses relentlessly on user benefit, while the underlying mechanics quietly concentrate more control upstream. Windows as a service was sold to the world as continuous improvement and continuous security. In practice, it's also become the delivery mechanism for continuous, incremental architectural expansion, one update at a time, each individually small enough to avoid outrage, cumulatively large enough to fundamentally change what your operating system actually does with your hardware. So let's move past diagnosis and into your actual practical checklist, because at this point, you deserve something you can act on today. Not just today, right now, while this is still fresh in your mind. First, check Recall directly, because it's the most literal form of Windows, remembering everything you do. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Recall and Snapshots. If you see Save Snapshots toggled on, turn it off. That stops new snapshots from being generated going forward. Then look specifically for the option to delete snapshots that already exist, because turning off future capture doesn't automatically erase your existing history unless you take that extra step. This works because Recall's entire design depends on that continuous snapshot pipeline. No snapshots means no timeline, which means no searchable memory for anything to analyze. The trade-off is straightforward. You lose the ability to rewind time using semantic search, but you also stop feeding a background system whose entire job is to observe your screen and organize it into a permanent record. Next, if you want this off in a way that actually survives the normal toggle drift problem that plagues every Windows privacy setting over time, remove Recall as a Windows feature entirely rather than just switching it off. Use Windows Search, type turn Windows features on or off. Find Recall in the resulting list, uncheck it, and restart your PC. Microsoft's own support documentation. He explicitly confirms that any snapshots previously saved get deleted the moment Recall is removed this way. That distinction matters enormously because it means you're not just pausing the camera, you're physically uninstalling the camera module itself. The trade-off is that future Windows updates may reintroduce prompts or repackage the feature under different framing, so removing the optional component gives you a genuinely stronger boundary than a settings toggle ever will, but it's not necessarily a permanent one either. There's one detail most coverage of this topic misses entirely, and it genuinely changes how you should think about your own responsibility here. Managed enterprise devices. Microsoft documents that Recall is disabled and removed by default, and administrators must actively configure policy to enable it if they want it available at all. That tells you something important. Microsoft already understands internally that recall carries enough real risk that organizations shouldn't have it casually present without a deliberate decision. So if you're a home user without a compliance department watching over your shoulder, you effectively have to become your own administrator. Treat your personal machine with exactly the same level of suspicion an enterprise IT department would apply, because the feature exists specifically to create a searchable memory of everything you do, and the only person deciding whether your life needs to be that searchable at the operating system level is you. Finally, Lockdown Copilot itself is a genuinely moving target rather than a one-time fix. Microsoft's own management documentation acknowledges Copilot is delivered as an app, and users can uninstall it from Settings, under Apps, then Installed Apps, selecting the 3 dots next to Copilot and choosing Uninstall. Microsoft separately notes that IT administrators can prevent installation entirely or remove it using policy tools and scripting. For an ordinary user, the simplest durable move is uninstalling it and then staying genuinely vigilant after every major Windows update, because the trade-off is real. You may lose a built-in assistant entry point, and Microsoft may quietly repin or resuggest it again down the line. But uninstalling it now meaningfully reduces its background presence and removes one more system-supplied funnel into cloud-connected behavior you didn't specifically ask for. Now handle diagnostics and connected experiences, because this is where a huge amount of the background chatter actually lives, quietly in the settings menus almost nobody visits. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Diagnostics and Feedback. Your goal is minimizing what you can without breaking updates or device security in the process. Turn off optional diagnostic data wherever the toggle appears. This works because it directly reduces both the volume and sensitivity of what your operating system is permitted to transmit for improvement purposes. The trade-off is that Microsoft gets fewer signals to help diagnose edge case bugs specific to your exact hardware setup, but you also meaningfully reduce the chance that your own browsing and usage patterns become raw material for a feedback pipeline you never consciously agreed to fund. Don't dismiss this as just diagnostics either, because Microsoft's own optional diagnostic categories are genuinely broad, explicitly including product and service usage, software inventory, browsing history data, including typed address, bar text, and search terms, and inking, typing, and speech utterance data. You don't need to assume the worst case to see the real risk here. The categories alone tell you exactly how wide that telemetry boundary can get if you simply leave it at its default setting. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but where are the actual CPU cycles I'm supposedly getting back? That's genuinely hard to quantify with one universal number, because every machine's configuration is different, and Microsoft doesn't publish a simple recall costs you X% CPU label anywhere. But the underlying logic is unavoidable. Any system that periodically captures screenshots, encrypts them, stores them, analyzes them, and maintains a continuously updated searchable timeline is consuming real compute, memory, and disk I/O. And even when the AI math itself gets offloaded to dedicated silicon, the orchestration around it still carries genuine overhead. So the win you're actually buying here isn't just abstract privacy. It's reclaiming the basic right to let your own PC idle when you're not actively doing anything demanding, instead of letting your operating system quietly treat every idle moment as an opportunity to process your recent past on your own dime. So here's your spoken checklist, simple enough to actually remember after you close this video and life inevitably happens. Turn off the snapshots, remove the feature entirely, and minimize the telemetry. Do those 3 things, and you've meaningfully reduced both the background AI workload running on your machine and the amount of your own behavior your operating system is allowed to treat as raw material for someone else's roadmap. You're not being paranoid for wanting your computer to function like a tool again. You're being rational. Tell me honestly in the comments whether your fan spins up during moments that should genuinely be idle, and whether any of this explains something you'd already been noticing but couldn't quite name. If this cut through the marketing language for you, hit that like button so it reaches someone else still wondering why their brand new machine somehow feels heavier than it should. And subscribe, because these systems tend to expand rather than shrink as the roadmap keeps maturing, and the fastest way to stay ahead of that is checking your own settings today, not someday.